Ladies and gentlemen, we are now boarding Group A. Please have your boarding passes ready to scan. If your phone is cracked, old, or was chewed up by your Chihuahua travel companion, please refrain from holding up the line. And instead, simply go to Verizon and trade in any phone in any condition from one of their top brands for the new Samsung Galaxy S25 Plus with Galaxy AI on Unlimited Ultimate and a watch or tab. Also, on now.
Service plan required for watch or tab. Trade in and additional terms apply. See Verizon.com for details.
G'day, America. It's Tony and Ryan from the Tony and Ryan podcast from Down Under.
This episode is sponsored by Boost Mobile, the newest 5G network in the country.
These guys are no longer the prepaid wireless company you might remember. They've invested billions into building their own 5G towers across America, transforming the carrier into America's fourth major network alongside the other big dogs.
Yep, they're challenging the competitors by working harder and smarter, like this amazing new network they've literally built. They have blazing fast 5G and plans for all the latest devices. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com.
Welcome to mini episode number 414 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And I have 3 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from the 31st of October 2025. And story number 1 comes from Lisanna. My first ever experience I had came to me at a time in my life where things weren't going as I would have hoped for. Like most teenage kids, I did my fair share of partying and overdoing it when it came to bad habits. After a long night of partying, I came home. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and my brother, which meant my brother and I shared a room together. On this night, he was at my dad's, so I was in the room by myself. We didn't have a lamp in our room, so the top of the ceiling was lined with Christmas lights. I remember always feeling uncomfortable having our bedroom door open because it faced a hallway, and right across was a bathroom with a huge mirror. I've always had a weird thing about holes and mirrors. I think I'm just always expecting to see something or someone there, whether in the hallway or in the mirror that shouldn't be there. It's been a fear of mine for as long as I can remember. That night, I'm laying there in my bed, door closed, with the spins from too much drinking, when all of a sudden I feel this horrible sense that I'm not alone. All I could do was shut my eyes, because at this point, I'm frozen in fear and can't move my body. And that's when it happens. A blood-curdling scream in my left ear. Just typing about it gives me the chills. I could feel the breath on my face. It scared the living shit out of me. I can't even begin to explain what was going on in my head when that happened. Just utter fear. I didn't want to open my eyes. I just kept them pinned shut. Eventually, I opened my eyes only to realize I still could not move. I remember using my eyes to scan what I could in front of me. I started by looking at my feet, the whole time feeling too fearful to look up but knowing that I had to. As I started looking towards the ceiling, I saw nothing but black smoke, and right in the middle I see this horrible face and eyes. As soon as the eyes meet mine, it was going to swallow me up. I tried to scream but couldn't, although I could hear faint gasps coming from me. It seemed like it lasted forever. I actually started praying, and I'm not a religious person at all. Being raised religious and having no choice but to be a part of that religion and church, I made a point to leave it behind me as soon as I had free will to do so. But this night, I prayed. At some point, the pressure on me lifted and the black dark thing was gone. I laid there feeling defeated, like I almost just lost my life. As soon as I had the energy to get up, I did. I was soaking wet from sweat and tears. I ran into my mom's room, and mind you, I'm 18 at this time. I just fearfully stutter words to her about something attacking me in my room and crawled into bed with her. When I finally fell asleep, I had a dream that I was in my grandparents' home. It was empty as far as I could see, but the smell of coffee and cookies and a lingering breakfast meal are there. I'm walking through the house to see my grandfather there in the den. He passed away when I was 12 of leukemia, and losing him was the most intense loss I had experienced at that point in my life. So much so that after his passing, my life took a turn, with me trying to self-medicate. I always worried about him watching over me and being disappointed in the path that I took after he passed. But here he was, standing there looking like he did before he got sick. He just smiled at me and told me to sit down. He then told me not to worry, that everything would be okay, that I'm watching over you and I'm always with you. This isn't what you'll be doing forever, and you'll get past your troubles. He hugged me and I got to tell him that I loved him, and then I woke up. Over the years, I've looked back at that moment over and over. One day it just popped in my head that the screaming I heard before my experience was me. Maybe a warning. But I've always felt it was me warning myself of what was to come. I've never been able to forget that night. In fact, it wasn't much longer until I got clean after that. Now I'm going on 18 years of no drugs and 10 years of no drinking. It's crazy how things come to you. My brother Chris and I are extremely close. Growing up the way we did only made us stronger because we had each other to get through the tough times. We are exactly 7 years and a day apart. My mom went into labour during my 8th birthday, and by the next day my brother arrived. We have different fathers, but never went through any sibling rivalry. Quite the opposite. We were each other's best friend. When my brother joined the army in his 20s, it was extremely difficult to let go of my overprotective sister mode. I had to respect that it was his decision and just support him completely no matter how I felt. Deep down, I was terrified of what he would face alone. It really hit hard during COVID because I had nothing but time to think of all the dangers he could be facing. I knew my brother had an important job, and he couldn't talk about it. So we talked about what we could anytime we wrote a letter or an email. On one of his deployments, he was in an undisclosed location. We were not allowed to know anything about where he was or what he was doing. I tried to silence my fears, but every day we didn't know took its toll. Up until this point of his life, I was his protector. But now he was in unfamiliar territory, facing dangerous unknowns. One night I fell asleep and had this extremely vivid dream. It was my brother and he was in hiding, like he was in some pit or something. I had this overwhelming feeling like I wanted to call him, but I shouldn't. For some reason, I just decide to call. His ringer goes off, but instead of a normal cell ringtone, it's circus music. And right as it's about to be picked up, there is a massive explosion. Like my call gave up his hiding spot and left him dead. I woke up in absolute fear because it felt real. My heart was pounding, I felt sick, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, I go to work, eyes swollen from sobbing all night, and I get a phone call. I don't answer because it's a number I don't recognise. My phone beeps to alert that I have a voicemail and it's my brother. I could tell in his voice that something was wrong right away. Like I said, we are super close, so I knew something was wrong. It was just a drawn-out voicemail. Most of the messages I got were a quick hello. This was different. Almost as if he didn't want to get off the phone. When my brother comes home at Christmas, I got a little out of him. We find out where he was, and the night I had my dream, their position was exposed, and they were targeted by a missile with seconds to escape. I can't explain my dream, or why I thought he'd have a cell phone when he was in hiding, but knowing that my dream was a version of his reality shook me. I'm glad my brother made it out alive. Still can't believe how real that dream was. Oh, that has full on given me the heebie-jeebies, right? How crazy is that? I mean, that has come up a number of times, you know, obviously on the podcast. People who are really close, people who have a really close bond, whether that's siblings, parents, you know, husband and wife, whatever. And they have these dreams about each other at pivotal moments in each other's lives. Like something about that psychic connection between two people who are really close. Like if there's nothing else I believe on this podcast, it's that people who are really close have a weird psychic connection. I read a story on Patreon, I think it was last week, And it was about a husband and wife, you know, back maybe in the 80s, early 90s, and he had gone away to do something, and the wife couldn't get in contact with him, or just the instantaneous contact that we have today wasn't an option, and she was really worried about him. And she had this like really intense dream one night where she, in her dream, she felt like she had left her house, like literally traveled through the sky, and ended up like standing over her husband while he was in bed. And then she woke up, right? But then her husband contacted her and was like, I had the weirdest dream last night. So he had woken up, turned around in the bed and saw her standing in the room. And then she like faded into nothing. Isn't it like, it blows my mind. And I do think that people have some sort of weird psychic connection. And going back to your original experience, like I think the manifestation of things that are going on in our lives is really fascinating, right? I'm not saying that this wasn't a paranormal experience, because obviously it had a profound impact on you, but it's really interesting that later you were like, that scream was me. That scream that I heard in my ear, that was me. That was like, was that your own psyche? Did your psyche attract or manifest this kind of sleep paralysis type state where you were lying there with this black mist over you, and then you fell asleep and had that dream about your grandparents, and your granddad's like, don't worry, like everything will be okay? Is that why your granddad appeared to you at that time in your dream? Because you just had this awful experience, and then your granddad was like, now is the time. I need to go and see her right now. I just think I think weird things happen within dreams, even without them being paranormal. Like when people talk about their dreams and you realize that, oh, this dream directly relates to what's going on in your real life, or it directly relates to fears that you have, I think it's fascinating.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now boarding Group A. Please have your boarding passes ready to scan. If your phone is cracked, old, or was chewed up by your Chihuahua travel companion, please refrain from holding up the line. And instead, simply go to Verizon and trade in any phone in any condition from one of their top brands for the new Samsung Galaxy S25 Plus with Galaxy AI on Unlimited Ultimate and a watch or tab. Also on them.
Service plan required for watch or tab. Trade in and additional terms apply. See Verizon.com for details.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Opinions will always differ, and so they should. Because everyone draws from different influences. Parents, peers, politics, education, media, culture. What you believe depends on who you believe. Financial Times readers know that their opinions are reliable because they're shaped by trusted journalism. Robust opinions. Confident decisions. Source, FT. To subscribe, go to ft.com/sourceft.
And story number 2 comes from Rhys. To preface, I was brought up with the strong belief that the dead cannot harm you. They can influence things, affect physical objects, and potentially appear and speak, but they never mean you any harm. Whether they are frustrated or worried or pleased, they are just trying to tell you something. My grandmother died in March 2021, non-COVID related, and she was always head of the household. She adopted several kids along with 4 of her own and was the kindest but most cunning woman I've ever known. The house I'm going to talk about we've lived in for almost 15 years. The day after the funeral, all the electricity in the house went on the fritz. The washing machine broke and flooded the kitchen, several lights blew, and the heating wouldn't work anymore. Now, we had always called her an owl witch in the most endearing way, and our house was a bit of a state following the grieving process. So we took that as her saying, look, I'm fine, you've cried enough, now get this fucking house tidied and looking presentable and sort yourselves out. The electrical issues sorted themselves out overnight. No fuses were blown, including the washing machine, which we have to this day. And we replaced the bulbs the day after just to be sure. Heating works no problem. There was plenty of oil left. I still live in this house when I don't move for work, and we have a little wooden hearth with a portion of her ashes, so even years later I dread what she's going to do next. In the same house, I've experienced sleep disturbances a few times, including sleep paralysis. All terrifying, don't get me wrong, but this time it felt completely different. For this, I went from asleep to fully awake in an instant. The kind of jolt awake you get when it's silent and you hear someone knocking on your door. I went to sleep as normal, all lights off apart from the hallway light, which is always on, with my bedroom door closed and latched. At around 3 a.m, I woke up to hear the sound of my door being opened. It was slow, deliberate, and quiet. I had an over-door rack to hold coats and hoodies and such, so it took a bit of effort to open and close. I was lying on my left side facing the door, fully awake and aware. And I watched this happen in slow motion because I couldn't move. As soon as the door was halfway open, I saw the figure. It was completely dark, humanoid, featureless, and with blurry edges. Though I was awake, I do need glasses, so take that particular detail with a grain of salt. I saw this thing come into my room, from above eye level, momentarily blocking out the light from the hallway, stepping through the door, and proceed to melt into the floor as it moved towards my bed. It was as if it collapsed in on itself and went from solid to liquid state for the 3 or 4 feet it took to get to my bedside. I was still unable to move, so I just waited. Then I felt it. Whatever entity it was, it had regained form to a certain extent, as I could feel fingers slowly making a depression on my mattress, going underneath the covers towards me. It was agonizingly slow. Eventually it got to what I think was a few inches from my still paralysed face. It had to have its palms and forearms on the bed by now, to about the depth of a person sitting on the bed in front of me. And then it suddenly withdrew. Much faster than it had pressed down. I didn't see its form rebuild or reform, and my door stayed open. I stayed awake for another few minutes before finally going back to sleep until morning, when my door was still in the same position. Nobody else in the house was up during the night, and to this day I have no idea what this was, and nothing like it has ever happened since. Rhys, if I remember correctly, you are from Northern Ireland, and let me tell you, I can hear an Irish an Irish granny being like, look at the fucking state of this house. Jesus Christ, it's a holy show. Get it sorted. And I too would live in fear as to what she would do next. Because it is weird to have all of those things happen at the same time. Like, all the electric in the house goes, the lights blew, the heating doesn't work, the washing machine broke and flooded the kitchen. Like, that's all weird to happen overnight, and then for it to be fixed overnight. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would be living in fear. I'd be like, what is this woman capable of from beyond the grave? And your second story is absolutely terrifying. To wake up and watch the door open, to physically see that happening in front of your eyes. Because if you woke up and the door was already open, you'd be like, did I close it? Did I latch it properly? But if you wake up and you physically see the door open and then this thing is melting into the floor, ugh, that is horrific. It melts into the floor and then reforms at the edge of your bed. Shut up. No, thank you. How utterly terrifying. And to physically feel the depression on the mattress and to feel these hands going underneath the covers towards you. Honestly, it is anybody's worst nightmare. And I'm very glad for your sake that nothing has happened since. And our third story today comes from Laura. I was about 12 years old and used to love buying girl magazines like Mizz. For the October edition, there were instructions on how to make your own Ouija board. So myself and one of my friends decided to give it a go. Now keep in mind, I didn't have the internet at this point and had no idea of how risky it could be. So we got out my Monopoly board, wrote down the letters on pieces of paper and cut them out. Once everything was set up, we decided to try and speak to my mum's gran, who had passed away 4 years previously. We started asking if my gran was there. At first, nothing happened. We giggled nervously and tried again. I asked if my gran was there. Show us a sign. Suddenly, something grabbed my left ankle. I screamed and in my haste, flipped the Monopoly board. My friend asked what was wrong and I explained what had happened. We then quickly put the board away and threw away the pieces of paper. Unfortunately, that was the first of many experiences in that house. I've spoken to a psychic in recent years, and she reckons that day I opened a portal, as after that day myself and my siblings have all experienced a lot of supernatural things. Mizz! Let me tell you, Laura, that takes me back. So for context, Mizz was a magazine, monthly magazine, weekly magazine, I don't remember, that was for teenage girls. It was aimed at teenage girls back in the 90s, early 2000s. I loved Mizz. And there was also one called Shout, which I loved. However, hectic doing a make your own Ouija board for the October edition. You know, that's chaotic energy. Am I here for it? Yes. Mizz absolutely traumatizing a generation of spooky girlies. How terrifying must it have been though, right? Because, you know, you're playing the Ouija board, nothing's happening, you're probably a bit giddy, a bit giggly, you're kind of like, oh God, this is so silly, we're so stupid doing this. And then something grabbing your ankle. I would have just spontaneously combusted, burst into flames on the spot. I would be flipping tables, never mind flipping the Monopoly board. How absolutely, utterly petrifying. And look, we all know the PSA at this point, okay? Ouija boards will traumatize you. The end. That's the PSA. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Lisanna, Rhys and Laura for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from the 31st of October 2025. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now boarding Group A. Please have your boarding passes ready to scan. If your phone is cracked, old, or was chewed up by your Chihuahua travel companion, please refrain from holding up the line. And instead, simply go to Verizon and trade in any phone in any condition from one of their top brands for the new Samsung Galaxy S25 Plus with Galaxy AI on Unlimited Ultimate and a watch or tab. Also on them.
Service plan required for watch or tab. Trade-in and additional terms apply. See Verizon.com for details.